Good morning, everybody, ladies and gentlemen. This is our last meeting before Christmas, I'm sure you'll be pleased to know. And welcome to Ross. He's been a cabinet meeting this morning, so he's made it. Welcome, Ross.
Keith.
I mean, Keith, I'm sure you're worn out. Ross is not coming, I take it? No. So we're one cabinet member less. I'll put you next to the mince pies, Keith. I'll put you next to the mince pies, Keith.
Thanks. There you go. Apologies.
Right. Well, first of all, I'd just like to welcome Lisa back to her first meeting after a long illness, and a warm welcome from everybody here, Lisa.
Thank you.
And commiseration to poor old Debbie, who's not feeling 100% today, but she's joining us on Zoom. So welcome to you too, Debbie, as well.
Thank you.
So we'll kick off with apologies, please. Julie?
Just an apology for Mr. Peters, Chair.
Well, I'll give the apology. Ross Ward doesn't want to be on this committee, neither does James Salisbury, so I think you might as well take them as a permanent apology, I think. Right, declarations of interest. Julie?
No.
Right.
Minutes of the meeting held.
Minutes of the meeting held on November the 1st, 2022.
Should we agree them as a true record?
Everyone
Agreed.
happy? Smashing. Thank you, Julie. Right, going to the important stuff now. This is Lisa's welcome back. Agenda item 4 is the annual governance statement. Over to you, Lisa. Assisted by Debbie, I think.
Thank you, Chairman. And I'd like to say thank you very much for all your kind thoughts and wishes whilst I've been off. It's absolutely fabulous to be back today. And it doesn't feel like 5 minutes, but I have had a journey to get here, so thank you very much. To start off with, I also want to thank both Debbie and also Julie Plant for all the hard work that they've done in actually updating the annual governance statement. Although I am actually presenting it, the hard work of updating the documentation and taking it through the corporate working group has been undertaken by both Debbie and Julie, so thank you for that as well. So the annual governance statement is for 21-22. It's a key part of the annual accounts that are also being brought to you today for approval. It's a key governance document within the set of accounts. It's how you gain assurance that we've got a robust governance framework operating within the council during this period for the accounts. As previously mentioned, it does run from the 1st of April 2021 through to the current date, so it's been updated continuously throughout the summer period. So the statement is a means by which you get that assurance that the framework that we have in place is working effectively. So it outlines what the framework is, and also how we've assessed that framework to ensure it's working effectively. We'll give you an update of what actions have been taken in relation to the governance issues that were reported this time last year, and also identify and pull through those key governance issues that we need to keep an eye on within the council for the next forthcoming 12-month period. So if I turn to page 9, it talks about, section 1 talks about the scope of responsibility, what governance actually is. It's the mechanisms that we deploy to ensure that we meet good governance and have effective governance as well, which is really key when we're administering public sector monies. It outlines the purpose of the governance framework at section 3, and the diagram at section 4 on page 10 outlines what the principles are of that governance framework. So it's taking the principles that were outlined within the Sit for Governance document and deploying them within the council. And that is the essence of the single sheet framework on page 11, which demonstrates how all of those various systems that we've got operating within the council operate and how they then contribute to that overall arching effectiveness of governance within the organisation. On page 12, we determine and outline all the different entities within the council and their individual responsibilities. So that goes from the top all the way down to the individual employee as well. So everybody has a part to play within the governance framework. So what is the governance statement itself? That's outlined on page 13. So really it brings together the framework and allows us to assess that framework and give an overall opinion. In order to help define what that framework is, the diagram on page 14 demonstrates how it all fits together and how those various sources of assurance flow through all the way through to the annual governance statement. So the statement itself is prepared on an ongoing basis, right up to the point in which the accounts are approved. We've set out in previous years, and the same, those principles have been carried forward as well, as to what defines a significant governance issue, because it's those that should be included within this particular document and brought to your attention as members of the Audit and Standards Committee. So we have 6 principles which are bulleted at the bottom of page 15 over the 2 columns. So really, does it threaten the achievement of organisational objectives? Is there a significant failure to achieve good governance? Is it an area of significant concern to an inspector such as Ofsted or the CQC, external auditor or a regulator? Have the monitoring officer and the section 151 flagged any significant issue up, or yourselves, as part of your work programme that you've undertaken over the last 12 months? Is there an issue of public or stakeholder concern that needs to be identified? And is there an issue that cuts across the organisation and requires cooperation across all departments in order to resolve that matter? So section 11 talks about how the council has monitored and evaluated that effectiveness over the past 12 plus months. Annex 1 is that assessment. So that is the work that's been undertaken during the year to ensure that we've got an opinion, or draws together an opinion in relation to how effective that governance framework is. So if I take you through the key elements of that, on page 34, we talk about the annual review of the Code of Corporate Governance, and I know that was brought to you in July. Debbie brought that to you in July, and that's an update of the detail behind how we meet those various principles within the wheel, section 4 in the annual governance statement. Again, there is the framework itself with all those contributory processes, and you'll notice and identify that a number of those are subject to internal audit review as well, and are included within the audit plan. Page 36 is the updated progress in relation to those items that have been identified in the action plan relating to the Code of Corporate Governance. And there are a number of those that are ongoing, and that they will then roll forward into the 2022 action plan. So supporting paper 2 talks about how we've dealt with those matters that were brought to you and contained within the annual governance statement for last year, the progress in relation to those. So where progress is still outstanding, or there's still work to do on those, again, many of these are ongoing exercises, so they're not just something that's time framed within one particular year. They've been carried forward as new actions within the current annual governance plan. So there are a number of those, but there are also a number that have been implemented. In terms of supporting paper 3, that's the annual audit letter. So we get sources of assurance in relation to how the external auditors view our financial governance and also our value for money opinion. On page 45, we have the latest signed off audit letter, which relates to year 1920. So there is also commentary included on there with regard to the annual audit 2021 is still outstanding. It's still at draft because of those issues that have been brought to the attention of the committee previously. And I'm sure that our external audit colleague will update you in relation to the current position as part of his update. Supporting paper 4, page 47, highlights and details the head of audit opinion, and that's been part of the outturn report that came to you earlier this year. So you've seen that opinion in regard to the robustness of the control environment assessment by the internal audit team. We then have the opinions at supporting paper 5 from the key statutory officers, the monitoring officer and the chief financial officer, and there's no significant issues, governance issues to raise as part of that, so that's a positive. In relation to supporting paper 6, this is where we draw together all other sources of assurance from all the different work that is ongoing within the organisation. And if you turn to page 58 and 59, it's summarised there. So there was nothing major that was pulled out as a result of those particular governance aspects from all those different sources of assurance. And also guidance that was issued by SITFA earlier this year related to inclusion of a commentary regarding COVID and how the organisation has dealt with COVID. So section F has been incorporated within this particular area. So as you can see, a lot of work has been undertaken by internal audit. There's been quite a lot of preparation as well by the organisation itself in order to ensure that there was tight control over the spending of COVID monies. And then the remaining 3 appendices to this are examples of the framework again, the assurance gathering process, how we pull that together, and then also how we look and evaluate corporate governance as part of a controls assurance statement that is then signed off by the Director of Corporate Services. So all of that information feeds into section 11 on the annual governance statement in summary form, together with the COVID response details at that point. Section 13 replicates the information that is within the assessment document with regard to the improvements for last year. The key element for consideration for today is at section 14 on page 29, the governance issues that will be taken forward and monitored during the next 12 months. As you can see, the first 8 are brought forward and are ongoing, and you've got key officers identified who are responsible for ensuring that those actions are taken. And then from AGS 9 through to AGS 15, they are the new items that have been identified and included within this year's statement. So the first one is in relation to the governance arrangements with regard to the new highways operating module, delivery model, so that will be monitored. AGS 10 is talking about how we ensure that we've got the relevant documentation ready for the COVID-19 inquiry, should we be asked to contribute. AGS 11 talks about how we internally are reviewing the governance arrangements with regard to lactose. This has come as a result of a lot of public interest reports that have recently been issued, notably the Robin Hood company that was run by Nottingham City. So it's taking the learning from those organisations and those reports and benchmarking against our own arrangements to ensure that we don't inadvertently replicate those governance weaknesses. There's a lot of information that's being publicised within the wider community audit from our legal colleagues with regard to what led to those failures in governance. So we're taking that learning and ensuring that that isn't replicated. At AGS 12, we talk about the embedding the arrangements with regard to the new joint committee for the Staffordshire Leaders Board. AGS 13 is in relation to the changes to social care reform and the implications for that, in particular the level of funding, so that is ensuring that we've got sufficient budget to be able to go forward. AGS 14, there will be a Care Quality Commission review at some point during 2023, so making sure that we've looked at what the key lines of inquiry will be, we've benchmarked our current arrangements and taken action where we can. And AGS 15, the final one, talks about addressing the operational gaps that were identified as part of the arising from the Children's Transformation project that was completed in December 21, so to make sure that those are addressed and relevant action taken. So that's everything that I wanted to talk about in regards to the annual governance statement. It is here for your approval, following which it will be signed by the Chief Executive and also the Leader of the Council. Happy to take any questions.
Great.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose COVID's changed the way the county council works, and there are a couple of things I think we're not covering in audit, but I'm going to let my colleague Janice speak on one of them, but I'm going to speak about how we measure what staff do. At the moment, we hear lots of stories about, oh, staff aren't as productive, or some people are more productive working from home. Now, I've got no difficulty with people working from home, as long as we're measuring their output. And if we're not measuring their output and comparing that and benchmarking that against similar colleagues, then I think one of the largest outlays this council has is salaries. So I think it's really important that we're getting a fair deal from our staff, and that we measure it and we can show that our staff are working hard, so we can stop people complaining and saying, oh, well, working from home is a bad thing. So I think perhaps we need to look at how leadership is done by the staff rather than time management. And so I would like that included in future audits, and I would like finance to work with HR to come back to this committee to tell us how you're going to do it, because we're very, very interested, because there's a lot of money involved here. Thank you.
I can give you assurance in terms of those teams that I personally manage, and yes, you're quite right, it does come down to leadership. It also means that they have got some very firm objectives that they have to achieve as part of a team. For example, the audit plan, and I'm sure that Debbie will reiterate, we have X number of audits to do in a year. You have the plan that comes forward. We know how many days that takes, and we measure staff on how they deliver that work. In terms of my ACFS, and any deviations from that, we'd have that conversation as part of their one-to-one, and it'd be getting underneath as to why they haven't met those or undertaken those jobs by the time that they should have done. So it's having that conversation and monitoring. In terms of the other team that I run, Adult Children's Financial Services, we have a data dashboard, so we know our demand coming in and our output, so we know that. We also know how many, for example, assessments, etc., or pieces of work would need to be undertaken during the day, the week, and again, that information is available to their line manager to have that conversation with them to ensure that they are delivering what's needed to be done. So we are definitely focused on outputs and making sure that staff deliver those outputs as required.
Can I just come back on that, Chair? But there's nothing in this report about this, and that's what I'm asking for, is something, a section about how we manage the council, how we bring our senior leadership, how they get staff to be working consistently across the piece. And I think that in this annual audit report, we need something in this about that. It's because all this report is about is giving assurance. Yes? Correct. So part of this, the assurance that I want to see in this report is that we are a good employer, and we know what we're doing, and we can show that, because across the piece we employ, I don't know, 10,000 people, and consistently across all teams we're doing this. It's not just your teams, Lisa. There are an awful lot of teams out there, and I as a representative of the people in my division, would like to be able to say, yes, your council staff do work hard, and I can give you that assurance. At the moment, I can't. Thank you.
I can just tell you, I wish we did employ 10,000 people, but we don't. We only employ 6. Rob, would you like to come through?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I think just before I answer the question specifically, just a reminder in terms of roles, if I may, please. And the report that you've got in front of you to start with is about that assurance framework. Where we'll end up with this conversation is one around performance, which is somewhat different. So I think the task in terms of the AGS is whether the governance framework, whether the assurance statement is fit for purpose, as opposed to whether we're getting the best performance out of the people that we employ, which I think is a different issue. Like Lisa, I see examples of home working that are very, very effective. I think in other service areas, it can be more difficult to achieve. And whilst it is about outcomes and it is about outputs and what we do with the time that we've got, it's actually easier to respond to your question when it's a transactional service. So if I'm paying invoices on behalf of the County Council for thousands of suppliers, it's pretty easy to map that through, see where performance times are, and believe me, if we don't hit the performance and we're not paying people, we soon find out about it. So all of that is actually easier to manage, and actually it doesn't matter where you sit to do most of those activities. Clearly, there are more obvious examples of teams across the council where it's more difficult to do that home working. Obvious example, school crossing patrols, household waste site operatives, and so on. There are certain activities that the county council undertakes you just can't do at home. And we don't have a situation where everybody is now at home as they were during the pandemic. It's more of a blended, it's more of a hybrid type approach. So staff will tend to be in the office 1-2 days a week, maybe 3 days a week, and spending some time at home. What I would say is, and that's in line with where we were before the pandemic, because we operated a smart working policy, which had a target of trying to achieve a ratio of the number of desks per people of 2 to 1. So there wasn't enough office space for everybody to be in all the time, because we operated a smart working arrangement. And that flexibility that you get with it does reap benefits, in my opinion. What I can say on behalf of my department for finance, we went into the pandemic putting aside all of the pressures, all of the stress and the uncertainty associated with being the pandemic, if you think back to those days. Actually, from a performance point of view, I was immensely proud of my teams, because we pretty much didn't miss a beat. We were able to operate because we'd all got laptops, because we had the smart working policy in place. We were able to operate as if we were in the office. I couldn't see a difference. And in fact, I think in one or two areas, I know in one or two areas, productivity actually increased for a little while. The problem with prolonged working from home is that people can become isolated. They feel less connected. There's less social interaction, as we are today, and it can, some tasks, some activities can be more difficult to undertake. If this were a planning session or a blue sky thinking session where we wanted to bring new initiatives together, that's better done face to face. Doing certainly financial processes, as I say, it doesn't really matter where you are in order to perform them. And if we can strike the right balance that allows people to respond to any caring arrangements that they do have, whatever that may be, whilst fitting in work around those caring arrangements, and I think there's a two-way relationship that actually I think is quite healthy and quite beneficial for all concerned. So what I would suggest is the request that you've made is probably better dealt with as an item on the internal audit plan rather than an assurance statement per se, unless I've misunderstood. And what you're saying is that
I just really want to be able to say, when people say, oh, staff, council staff, you know, they've got an easy life, they're working from home, you know, I think I'd like to be able to countermand that. I've got no evidence other than what you've just told me and what Lisa told me. Nobody's coming and telling us this so that we genuinely can put a hand on our heart and say, no, our council staff work their socks off, they deliver, etc. And I think we need something coming back, some report, whether internal audit's fine, but whether they have a section on how well we are getting staff to be productive. It's all about this productivity of staff. And yes, it will be measured differently. People in recycling will be measured totally differently from people in finance. People in childcare will be measured totally different. I understand all that, but it'd be nice to have a few headings. This is what we've looked at. We've worked with HR on the, internal audit can work with HR to make sure that HR are going around talking to managers. I'm talking about senior management, people one below you, perhaps, Rob, and saying, how is this all going? But it's really, how are you measuring it? How are you measuring this productivity? How are you measuring what your staff do? And how are you looking after also their mental health, for example? How many times do they come in? I think all that is really, really useful, and it allows councillors to get a much better picture of what's going on. At the moment, I feel that I don't know what's going on. Anyway, thanks.
If I may just follow up, I will take some soundings. Perhaps I'll have a chat with Julie as well. We just need to be mindful of the role of corporate review from a performance point of view compared to audit with the role that we have as part of this committee. I will take that away. I think it is, and again, if I just use the example in finance, paying those invoices, that does get picked up and monitored quarterly by Cabinet as part of financial health indicators, for example. So I think we can put something together that would give you that picture that we're looking for, but I think it would probably, I'm guessing a little bit now, but it would probably require another representation here, bringing in something from the corporate review or maybe the performance side of Cabinet.
Thank you, Rob. Janice, would you like to?
Thank you. The first note that I'd made when I read through this is the focus is on governance and not the content. But having said that, I think it is right that something goes through to the plan. On the same as what's already been mentioned there, in the same vein as that, is looking at the effective space management. And you've just alluded to the fact that, if everybody was to turn up, then there might be a bit of a problem. So I think that there is a room for that information, I would hope, to give us a good picture as part of the plan. As far as the governance is concerned on here, it sort of jumps off the paper to me as to the size of the task that's actually involved in having that holistic view, and I think that needs to also be appropriate to our previous topic, as to the whole of the task in hand and making sure that that is all reported on and then maintained. And I think that the job of doing that is certainly one to me that I appreciate the size of what's involved there, and also the work that's being done by internal audit. And I would personally want to put on record my appreciation for the support that I've had in those queries and things that I've raised as we've gone on through the time. So as far as the content is concerned here, I think that by and large it is smart throughout. There's probably one which I am sensitive to, which is AGS 1. And having as soon as possible makes me twitch a little bit. We have got a deadline in there of March 2023. But other than that, I think that as a governance document that we've got a detailed, sufficiently detailed and assurances. And I always finish off with who wants to be adequate. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for that, Janice.
I take the point in relation to adequate. I think that's auditor speak for good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Chair. I should maybe declare an interest in this in terms of how I believe as members of this audit committee, but in general as members of the council, I'm not happy with the way that I haven't been able to get the balance, as far as I'm concerned, back to where I want it to be, which is out with my constituents and residents out there at the moment after COVID-19, through to restrictions that's been placed on myself and other members that I'm aware of. Just looking at the document itself in terms of local vision, working together, developing members and officers, ethical values, maintaining a community focus. I think if we're not included as members in terms of our roles, and some work is done to involve us in what's going on with some of these work streams, I think you're going to end up in trouble. I'm certainly ending up trouble at the moment myself, in relation to some of the parish councils completely overreacting to the lack of my presence on some issues that I've been dealing with at the moment. I'm not going to go into details, but we've on about things that Rob's on about at the moment. Tight control, I feel like as a member I've been choked, and getting the right balance. And I feel at the moment, for me, this isn't the right balance. I feel that there has to be more work done to involve us more as members, and I hope other members feel the same. If they don't, then I apologise for me being different for everyone else. But from my point of view, in terms of governance, we are here to be part of the governing process as members. I feel that we're not being taken that seriously at the moment. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that particular point, and we can raise that as part of the Corporate Governance Working Group feedback as a result of the comments from yourselves back in relation to the AGS. Okay.
Caroline?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think this is an absolute excellent annual governance statement. I can't thank Lisa enough. This is the first time she's, Debbie enough, sorry, first time she's ever had to do this, and done an excellent job, totally excellent job. And we're here to approve this today. I, for one, will absolutely approve it. I just wanted to make a couple of little comments. Graham, we are backward looking, don't forget, so it's hard to go in and look at what people are doing at that time. We look backwards to see if things are in place. There are a couple of scrutiny committees we could go to with what you're suggesting there would, in my view, be better. And I absolutely agree with Keith that we aren't always treated as part of the council, and that does upset me. The one thing that was brought here was that they were looking at people who work here and getting free eye tests done and things, and I applied to the council to say, well, actually, you know, my eyes are going a bit weird at the moment. Can I have this free eye test that you suggested in the meeting? Oh, it's not for members. Yet it was said it was for members. So I really do think that we are treated separately, and yet it is meant to be member-led. So I think you make a very good point there, Keith. But I absolutely think this is an excellent statement, and Debbie, I can't thank you enough. I am watching you on screen, so if you do need to speak, just pop your hand up. Do you want to speak now? Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted to go back to the point around productivity and where audit can give assurance on that. So we undertake risk-based audits, and by that what we mean is that we look at what service and team objectives are, and then we look at the risks and how those risks in relation to the achievement of those objectives are being managed. So by this audit committee receiving various reports throughout the year, be it an investigation, be it a systems report, a top 10 risk, and also just the annual outturn, you are getting a feel for how managers are managing their staff to achieve those objectives that they're employed to do. So therefore, you are getting a sense of how well the council is being run, and the sense of how managers are actually managing their staff to accomplish those objectives. So by getting those audit reports, you are getting an insight into what's going on. And as part of lots of our work, you will receive information around performance management, performance monitoring, management oversight, and the like, as well as various metrics around how quick, say, a debt might be recovered or how quickly a payment is made. So you are getting that detail in a whole variety of ways, and this is brought back to committee.
Thank you, Debbie. So, on the basis of what we've heard today, can we approve this plan, please?
Absolutely. Thank you, Chair.
All in favour?
Aye.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Agenda item 5, the statement of accounts. That's Rachel. Obviously, these are unaudited as yet, but from what I gather, that the very little changes are made during the audit, so I hope that continues. Rachel, over to you. Oh, Rob, sorry.
If I could just open up, because actually the next 3 items are all interrelated and are all connected. I'd love to be able to sit here today and say you've got the draft statement of accounts in front of you, which simply present the finances of the council for the previous year in an understandable and easy to digest way. I'd love to be able to say that. Unfortunately, they are quite complicated. They're quite complicated because the rules that are in place require all sorts of different transactions and all sorts of different adjustments to be made. So that is why what we've done here is to include an item that Rachel's going to take you through now, just by way of some training into the accounts. That is, and I have to do this myself, just to refresh and remind myself exactly what those rules are and how they apply to the accounts. But as she goes through, Rachel will be able to pull out some of the actual numbers and some of the content from the statement themselves. Then we've got a report on the accounts themselves, and again the report tries to pull out some of the salient points around performance in 21-22, and then of course Hassan will then finish off by way of giving you an update on where the audit's at. We've discussed audit previously, and as you know, timescales have slipped somewhat on that, so it is more of a progress report rather than showing you the complete picture. But hopefully that helps you sort of just take a moment or two to listen to the training, to bring us all up to speed with the task in hand. Have a look at the accounts, and then they are, as I say, they are draft at this stage, and then listen to Hassan where we're at with progress on the audit. And then there will be subsequent reports that come back to you regarding the finality and the completeness of that audit. But hopefully that is helpful today. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. So, as Rob said, the aim of these slides is just to try to not exactly simplify the accounts, but just to bring out some of the important features of the accounts, areas you might want to pay particular attention to, and just highlight some of the more important numbers that are contained within there. So there are a number of sets of rules that we have to comply with when we produce the accounts, and the actual regulations are the local audit and accounts regulations. So they set out some of the particular notes which we have to include within the accounts, and also the timescales. And every set of accounts must be approved by the appropriate committee, and obviously for the County Council it's the Audit and Standards Committee which has the responsibility to approve the accounts or not. The accounts clearly have a purpose. They are presenting our financial status for that financial year in question. So the accounts show all the income we've received, all the expenditure which we have incurred during the year, and they also include the balance sheet, which shows a picture of our total assets and the liabilities which we owe to others, just all for that snapshot of the particular financial year. Obviously this is backward looking, so it's up to the 31st of March 2022, so it covers the same period of time as the annual governance statement, but whereas the annual governance statement is updated up till today, up till the point it comes to the committee, the accounts sort of stop at the 31st of March, and then we need to wait for the audit process to see whether there's anything which needs to be amended within there. There's always the previous year shown as a comparator as well, so that you can see how things have changed from year to year, and that can be something which is really quite useful to see. Income might have increased, for example, or decreased, or expenditure increased or decreased, and so it's really important to try to check back to the left-hand column in the financial statements to see the previous year and just compare that with how things are in the financial year in question. So another set of rules which we use when we produce the accounts is the Local Authority Accounting Code of Practice. Bit of a mouthful, so we tend to just refer to it as the code or the Code of Practice. There's one produced for every financial year. SIPFA is the body which produces that code. And this is the main Bible, if you like, by which we are measured. So the auditors will check that we have complied with that code when we've created the financial statements, and in all our accounting treatment, they check back to that code to make sure we've complied with it. And if we have not complied, they will report it through to you as appropriate. So the accounts always have to be signed off by someone senior who holds the responsibility, which is the Section 151 officer. So Rob, the county treasurer, signs off the accounts. And when he signs, he says that he agrees they present a true and fair view. So that's the wording in the regulations that we have to include there in that statement where he signs. So the accounts are available on our website, and obviously they are intended for anyone to view, so elected members, of course, our auditors and members of the public. And so for that purpose, there's also a set period of public inspection for the accounts. Again, that's contained within those regulations that says we need to set aside 6 weeks to invite the public in to inspect the accounts. Obviously, there's also the legislation around freedom of information requests, which means that, in fact, the public can ask a question related to our finances at any time during the year. They don't need to wait just for that 6-week period. We don't appoint our own external auditors. They are appointed by the Public Sector Audit Appointments body, and this year our auditors are EY, and we have Hassan here today who will be giving us an update on the audit afterwards. Another thing which people perhaps don't realise is that members of the public can contact the external auditor directly. So if they feel that there's an issue, a financial issue that they want to raise and to have investigated by the external auditor, contact details are always included in the front section of the accounts so that they can actually go directly to EY and raise an issue with them. So the accounts always follow the same format every year. They start with the narrative statement. So this is a statement from the county treasurer just setting out the financial position and setting out the outturn, and also a little bit of a forward glance there at how things seem to be progressing. Then that's always followed by the accounting policies. So this sets out how we intend to comply with that code of practice and how we will treat certain items in the accounts to make sure that we do comply with that code. That's a fairly key section for the auditors to check then that we are going to do what we say in those policies. Then follows the 4 financial statements themselves, and then a lot of notes, covering a lot of pages. So there's notes relating to the income and expenditure statement, and then there's balance sheet notes. So they're sort of set out in that particular order, and they will relate to each statement. So you'll see on the front of the financial statements that there's a relevant section directing you to the note, which then explains in further detail that number from the statement, how that's broken down. We also include the pension fund accounts in the accounts of the county council as the administering authority. They're smaller than the county council's accounts, but they follow that same format. So they've started with a narrative, accounting policies, and then the statements, etc. So kind of a mini version incorporated within the County Council's accounts. So in the financial statements, what are some of the key areas where you might want to look at in more detail and maybe sort of follow through to the notes on these particular areas? The comprehensive income and expenditure statement starts us off. That's the first statement on page 108 of the accounts pack. This shows the income we've received during the year and our sources of funding during the year, so council tax, etc., is all shown there. And then it ends up with either a surplus or a deficit on the provision of services. So this year it's a surplus, and it's a slightly larger surplus than last year, but I would direct you to note 6 and note 8 there to just get a further understanding of why that surplus is a little bit larger this year than the previous year. The balance sheet is another very important financial statement, of course, on page 110. So the top half is split into two halves. Top half is assets and liabilities, coming down to a net assets position, and then the bottom half shows how we fund those assets and liabilities. So that shows our reserves, which we hold. Reserves are split into usable and unusable, and so those labels mean exactly what they say. Usable reserves are cash, so that's savings, your savings account, your money held for a rainy day, your cash-backed reserves are in that usable category. And again, there's further notes that will break down what exactly is the money held in that pot there. Unusable reserves, as the name would suggest, they're not cash-backed, they're not usable, and they occur as a result of some of the notional transactions which we are required to include by the Code of Practice, but which don't actually have a cash backing behind them. So some transactions relating to fixed assets, for example, then mean that the opposite entry needs to be an unusable reserve. So our total assets less liabilities have increased. So that's kind of in line with the small increase in the surplus that we've seen on the income and expenditure statement. So some reasons set up there for the increase. So mainly because of the reduction in the pensions liability. The pensions liability is quite a complex number provided by the actuary to us every year, and it's updated every year following various fluctuations that the actuary will take into account. But it represents the hypothetical cost that we would have to bear if all members of the pension fund decided to take their pensions on the same day. So it's quite hypothetical from that point of view because it's not actually ever going to happen in practice, but it does represent the amount that we owe to the pension fund for the benefits which our pensioners are accruing. There's also a small increase in the amount of cash and investments held at the 31st of March. And again, there's different notes, so you can see the breakdown of that. But I would just say there that to bear in mind that the 31st of March is very much a snapshot. It's one day. So that's the amount of cash we held on that particular day. The next day, the 1st of April, it would be a different number. So it's just to sort of make that point that it's very much a cut-off date. So the usable reserves have increased. General balances have stayed broadly the same. Schools' balances not particularly very different from last year either. Unusable reserves have also increased, and that will be mirrored by an increase in our assets up at the top half of the balance sheet there. And then there is a whole statement on the movement in reserves, so that will set out some more of the reasons behind changes in the usable and unusable reserves. So just a bit of a forward look really, because we're talking about some accounts relating to March. It's now December of that year, so you might feel, well, why are we really particularly concerned about what happened on the 31st of March? Obviously, there's statutory reasons why we have to produce the accounts and then bring them to you for approval. But the narrative statement does include also a forward look, and one of the key areas for us to be audited is on our principle of going concern. So have we prepared the accounts assuming that the County Council will continue in its business as a going concern? Obviously we have done that, and we set out to the auditors our reasons and our rationale behind that principle. But just to give you an idea of what's happening in the current financial year, obviously we might say the pandemic is over, but we've got a new financial concern relating to inflation in the current year, and our current forecast overspend is 6.4 million. That was part of the Q2 monitoring report, which went to Cabinet in October. We'll shortly be preparing our Q3 report that goes to Cabinet in February, and obviously we're closely monitoring those inflationary pressures. We're also at the same time refreshing our MTFS and looking forward to the next financial year and setting the budget for that year, and that report goes to Cabinet tomorrow, the first draft MTFS report, and then the final report will go to Cabinet at the end of January to set the budget for 23-24. We'll obviously pay attention to the inflationary pressures coming through for that financial year, and also things announced by the government. For example, the autumn statement included the announcement that social care reform will be delayed. That has a financial impact for us going forward, so we can remove some of those potential costs for 23-24 at least. We also review the reserves annually as part of that budget setting process, so the figures included in the accounts now for up to the 31st of March are being reviewed as part of that MTFS process. So just a couple of slides about the pension fund. So obviously we've got those accounts there within the County Council's overall account, some page numbers there. The pension fund produces its own separate annual report, so they produce a much larger document incorporating their accounts with much more detailed information about the pension fund and its performance, which will be available on the pension fund website. One important point is just to reiterate that cash of the pension fund is always kept completely separately from cash belonging to the County Council. It's just important to sort of bear that in mind. The pension fund has performed quite well in the financial year 21-22. It's increased in its value, so an 11% increase. Obviously, we'll have to look forward to the 22-23 accounts to see how it's performed in the current financial year with the inflationary pressures and the fluctuations in the global economy that we've seen. So I'll just move now to ask whether anyone has any questions on the accounts at all.
Well, from my perspective, obviously, I've been in the council all my life, so I've got no questions. I know the work that goes into it, and I think we can all appreciate that. Thank you for that presentation, Rachel. Very comprehensive, and I know they're not audited yet, but we've got no trepidation on my part anyway to that. I'm sure there will be. Any questions to Janice? I can see Janice is chomping at the bit.
Yeah, sorry, that was just to indicate because the microphones were on at the same time and it wasn't picking it up. Yeah, I think it's quite a tricky one sometimes because I'm really keen to get into the detail of it, so you might have to bear with me a little bit because I understand the role that we do here as opposed to scrutiny committees as well. I think when I was reading through these, it's just mindful of the fact of the dates that we're looking at there, you know, and some of the inflation things that have happened since, as you've just mentioned, don't necessarily feature in here, but we're looking at some pretty volatile figures as well. I often refer to an actuary as a unicorn because I've never actually met one. I don't know what they do, where they exist. I don't know if anybody could introduce me to one. I would love to meet one. But the figures that come back are sort of, in some cases, pretty mythical as well because you've got some big variances with the pension funds. A couple of questions, if I may, and looking through the notes on those. With regards to the reduction in debtors, have we changed any of the terms that we're operating with? And why has that happened? Because that was something that was picked up a couple of times that went through. A little bit of indulgence, please. When we look at the disposal of assets, I would ask, and this is, I say, with a bit of indulgence here, that as members are consistently consulted about that. There's certainly been occasions where in my division where assets have been put up for sale and it's been in the local media that I've been advised of that, and we pick up obviously the residents' discontent about that. So as I say, a little bit of indulgence on that one. With regards to the endowments and trusts, I noted in the notes on 43 and 44 we've got those, but I think that there was a disparity between in the previous part of the report about how many of those that are actually in existence and how many that there were when we looked at the breakdown, or the breakdown that was provided there for endowments and trusts. Having said that, I do appreciate the size of what's involved in those, but I just thought that it would be worthwhile just getting a bit of clarity on that one. Bad debts appear to have doubled in a couple of years, and I thought that it might be worthwhile expanding on some of the information in that particular part as well. And then finally is one that I often ask, and there is a mention of it on page 192 with regards to investments in Russia and Belarus. I think I've asked previously, and I'm going to avoid using, but say it in the process, about how do we have confidence in our investments that are being made are responsible investments. I'm deliberately avoiding the word ethical. How do we have that reassurance? So we can see on here that there has been a stand made on those particular investments, but yeah, just as a point of reference on those, please. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Janet. I must concur with one of your statements you made. I think as a local member, I was informed about a property being purchased, asking for my opinion. I gave my opinion and took no notice whatsoever. And they spent over £600,000 of taxpayers' money buying a property for looked after children next to Alton Towers. Now, I think every child in the country has applied to stay in that place, but I just thought the place being next to Alton Towers for unruly kids was probably the most disproportionate place to put anybody, because there's no amenities whatsoever. Alton is in the middle of nowhere, really, but and I made that statement, and they still bought it. And I've actually questioned Mark DeVille, who's commercial cabinet member, and he wasn't happy either. So it just seems rather silly. So I do share some sympathy with you, Janice, on the other foot about you finding out in the media about something going on in your division, which is not appropriate. Just a point, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, hopefully I've made a note of all of the questions there. And thank you for the questions. Debtors' terms, no changes to our debtors' terms. However, this will probably be a theme through a couple of the questions actually. COVID made a difference, so we didn't change our policy, we didn't change our collection arrangements. However, the sheer nature of the pandemic meant that performance was difficult at times, and has resulted in an element of catch-up that's been required. However, in the overall scheme of the County Council's size and scale, not a significant issue for me. Disposal of assets is a matter for the property subcommittee, so what should happen is local members should be notified of any significant disposals as part of the considerations of that committee. If that hasn't happened, I'll take that away, if I may, and just sort of check with colleagues, but that's how the process should work. We do dispose of assets all of the time. It's normal for an organisation of this size. Bad debts was another one that you raised. Again, I think there's a COVID element to this. What you see in terms of the numbers going through the accounts is an increase in the bad debts provision. So that's necessary, in my opinion, because the pandemic has had an impact and we have more doubt attached to some of the debts that we have. That doesn't mean to say that we don't stop chasing, we don't stop collecting. That means to say that just on a prudent basis, it's wise, I think, to put more resource into our bad debts provision. Again, size and scale of the numbers concerned, it's relatively speaking a small amount. Endowments and trust funds, I didn't quite follow the question, if I may. I thought things had remained mostly static and similar compared to the previous year. If I just make them finish off whilst the mic's on. Investments that you mentioned, we don't have any. That is a conscious decision. It requires an element of due diligence to double check on behalf of the pension fund whether any pooled assets or any funds that you invest in have an associated knock-on effect. We've checked that and we're comfortable that we don't invest in said countries. But if you wouldn't mind clarifying the endowments question, that would be helpful.
Yeah, thank you. In the earlier part of the report, it mentions that there's 26 that are operated. And I think later on when I looked at the notes to try and establish in what capacity they existed, it mentions that there's sort of, I think, a breakdown of 13 endowments, and then trust funds was unclear. And I was wondering if there were any that were missing that weren't on that list for trust funds that made the difference, or it's just the way that it's been presented that doesn't necessarily correlate to the 26.
I think in note 44 about the trust funds, there are 13 of those as well, because there's 10 in that one line, social care comforts funds, and then 3 trust funds underneath.
Okay, yeah, so where it's just got those 4 that are listed, that's a combination of ones that are subsumed in it, but the totals are the same. I appreciate, again, the values in context are small, but for transparency, I always think that that's helpful that they are all identified.
I think if I may, Chair, we'll take that point away and see if there's any way that we can make that clearer by way of reference to the social care comforts funds. Thank you.
Keith, would you like to?
Why not, as they say in the business? I realise that we're just sitting here at the moment just going over accounts and everything else, but the one thing I do, I've been on council committees elsewhere and everything else, the one thing I always struggle with is some idea about how well we are doing, and accounts are just a way of measuring some aspects of how well we are doing. You've explained all the different elements about how to report it and all the rest of it. I don't know whether we could go any further than to once you take away highways, children's services, social care, pension fund and all the rest of it, and all those other aspects, that I'd like to know what percentage we've actually got left to actually do anything with. Figuratively speaking, I realise that we do try and do things, as I know I'm a corporate parent, you know, we do try and do things differently within social care and all the rest of it. So I'm not saying that they're dead subjects in terms of what we're doing, but financially, it's always presented as more of a burden than it is as an opportunity. You know, that's the way that it comes over. I know that perhaps it shouldn't come over like that, but that's how it comes over to myself on all these account committees and everything else I've been on. And then there's the relationship between audit, governance and accounts. And that's where I think I personally, I don't know about others, but that's where I fall down. We don't have shareholders. You know, we're a public body. So what are we trying to achieve by this committee to some extent? And I don't always get the answers I would like to discuss in more of a overall, not theoretical, but some idea of where we're going to try and achieve to go in future years. I realise that we've reacted all the time to a lack of funding from central government and everything else like that, and the reduction of all these fees and everything else, when you know it's a fairly big lump that we're dealing with. Or lumps, shall we say, with the pension fund and all the rest of it. So it's just, for me, is what could we do slightly differently to be able to get some nitty-gritty into all this and to help myself and others, not just the members of this committee, but members overall, to see how we're doing in relation, because the shareholders really are the public, the residents, community groups, all these other people that we're trying to help. And I find it difficult to be able to discuss collectively from an accounting point of view and everything else about how we are doing against our objectives, which is the whole point of existence as a council. Or have I missed something here? So Sorry, Chair, I just thought I'd widen the conversation a little bit, because this is something that I've come aware of being Cabinet. But, you know, thanks. I know there's no answer to this to such an extent, but is it something that we could potentially work on as time goes on? Thank you.
Yes, thanks to Councillor Flunder for taking a very complicated and complex area and expanding it out. It does help, but of course, I mean, and that's one of the nubs of the problems, I think, in terms of the current arrangements, that the accounts are very, very complicated, and that assessment of, well, what does that tell me, isn't that easy to deduce. I would absolutely concur with that. I don't use the term shareholders. We do, obviously, in different matters as far as the pension fund is concerned, but I think the County Council has a range of different stakeholders, and they are different. I can't imagine too many community groups being too interested in the current debate around how we value our infrastructure asset portfolio. As an example.
Can I just come back on that? Just to give you an example about where that might... Or do you want... It's up to you, Chair.
Well, I'll finish off. So a range of different stakeholders, and it does differ. I think Rachel's point about freedom of information actually is the answer to a lot of that. That's just a far better way to ask your question and then get a response with context. I do go back long enough to remember before the internet existed, before people had access to the information, and the public inspection of accounts process involved printing off the accounts on green and white paper that was about this big. That's why it was 6 weeks, so that people could have the time to plough through pages and pages and ask a question of somebody sat by the side of them. It's an archaic system, but those are still the requirements in the rules. So as I say, I think freedom of information is one answer to that. What could we do differently, and how are we doing? I think actually is a matter for corporate review. And again, there's just that bit of an overlap and that bit of a crossover, which I'm taking away from today. Corporate review do receive an update and do receive performance report on a quarterly basis, and that's scrutinised and assessed, as well as the other scrutiny committees receive their own performance information in addition to that. That, in essence, for me, tells us how we're doing. I think you're dead right, Councillor Flunder. It isn't just about what we've spent, because if we've spent to budget but actually haven't achieved much with it, then it's a pointless exercise. It has to have that performance, that non-financial assessment, as well as the financial assessment together. But maybe there is something that we could, again, take away. It's similar to the staff performance question, in a sense, to see if there's something we can do by way of an assurance from corporate review, or maybe a joint exercise, or an audit that crosses over the remits of the two committees. But we'll have a think about that and build something appropriate into the plan.
In a way, Keith, you answered your own question. It's all about government monies. Whatever the government gives us, we try to apportion it in the right, appropriate places. Have you got anything further you want to come back with?
Yeah. I mean, I wasn't trying to be critical about it. It's not just an issue here. It's an issue with all councils, from what I can see, from whatever size they are. It's difficult to be able to go back to the people that might be interested, which should be some of us, but I realise, as you say, that there's not many people that aren't necessarily riveted by accounts. But it is something that I think is something that we need to, as members, be aware of, but also try and get this idea of performance, which has been brought up earlier. So you're dead right in relation to that. My example, I was going to say, was at the Biddulph Youth and Community Zone. At the moment, I'm in the middle of an argument whereby they want to spend some funding to be able to improve the lighting, make it cheaper, put on what they called what are they called?
I don't know. You tell me.
Panels, solar panels, that's it, solar panels. Well, thank you, Karen. Solar panels and everything else. But it's difficult for them to get a response back from the properties, because it's a county council property that they rent as a peppercorn rent. So I'm not sure how to achieve that. I mean, that would achieve quite a lot of objectives in one tick. Both the community asset, climate change, and the elongation and spending of funding that would be worthwhile doing from outside the council. They can get grants to do this separately. So that's just an example of where I think some work could be done to try and improve things and to let everyone know what we could be doing. That's just an EG. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for this Rachel. Statement of accounts isn't easy, and to balance it in this day and age is I know it's a draft still, it is almost amazing. We are hearing of other councils that can't do that, so I think again this is absolutely excellent. I gather it's going to come back to us in January, being as though this is a draft, which isn't the norm. But we were...
No, it's not coming back in January.
When's it coming back, Mr Chairman? Sorry, because it's only a draft.
Yeah, the reference to January was about the MTFS, so that needs to come back to Cabinet in January. The accounts themselves are the draft accounts that we think are it. So this is what we're asking you to approve today. And there is a delegation to myself in consultation with the chairman if we need to make any minor tweaks as a consequence of the audit. If there's something significant as a consequence of the audit, I'd suggest that's when I bring the full set back again. But if it's minor tweaks and minor adjustments that are required, just to finish them off, the proposal is there's a delegation to myself and Mike.
Yeah, maybe I didn't make myself clear. That's exactly what I meant, that the draft is pretty much what we'll see. But if there is any minor adjustments, we will see those, won't we?
Again, I can bring the full set of accounts back.
We don't need the full set, just what the amendments
or by exception,
are.
I can give you the amendments. Yes,
Yeah.
and that will be detailed in Hassan's report in due course as well.
Yeah,
Those
no,
adjustments.
brilliant. So, yeah, I think excellent report. Thank you, Rachel.
Right, members, I think we'll move on now. Hassan's been sitting there very patiently from Ernst Young. Thank you for your attendance.
Did we need to approve?
Oh, yeah, sorry, yeah, we need to approve them. I know, although they're only draft, I mean, I don't like approving anything draft, but as long as everyone's happy with that, we've got to
As long as we get any
yeah,
amendments.
I don't think we've got any other choice, really, but too late, yes, absolutely. So thanks for your indulgence, members. Hassan, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So I've got a position paper in terms of the current status of our audit. It outlines the 2021 audit as yet to be concluded. One of the key issues relates to infrastructure assets. Highlights within the report that statutory instrument was issued by DLUC on the 30th of November, and there will be further information via a SIPFA technical bulletin being issued in early January. Following the issue of that guidance, we'll then look to assess whether we need to undertake any additional procedures, liaise with the finance team, and then complete those outstanding areas in respect of the 2021 accounts. We are also at this moment in time undertaking procedures in relation to the 21-22 accounts, which the committee has just had presented. So undertaking our planning procedures and also initial testing on those financial statements. So that's a very brief summary of where we're at this moment in time, but happy to take any questions if members do have any.
Oh, thank you, Sam, taking the time and trouble to come and visit us today.
I was going to say.
No questions? I think we've... Janice?
Sorry. Yeah, it's just with regards to the timeframes on there, obviously we're reacting to information as it's coming through. Is there likely to be anything else that's going to be impacting on the ability there to be able to hit those timelines?
Are we expecting any additional kind of like surprises to be coming through? I hope not. So there is this issue in relation to infrastructure assets, which we're working through. As I said, in the beginning of January, going to be getting the guidance. We've already got dates outlined for a training event for our teams to take forward any points that we need to consider, and once that's issued, we'll be looking to conclude our work in that area.
So with regards to capacity and resource, everything else is there and available to be able to satisfy the requirements of it. It's just clarification that we need now.
Yeah, so we do have our teams. We do have a team allocated to conclude the work. I think members might be aware that across the profession there has been resource and capacity issues, which has impacted ourselves as a firm as well, and the work that we need to do in order to conclude the audit. It's not going to be the case that we're going to be able to do all of the authorities which haven't yet been done within the same time frame, but we're looking to do our work for Staffordshire County Council in the January to February period.
I just wanted to thank you, Hussein, for all the work that you've done for us and for being here today. I know I, for one, can be very hard on you, but I would like to thank you for everything that you've done for Staffordshire County Council accounts.
Thank you.
We now go to agenda item. I'm going to put my mics on. Agenda item 8, the internal audit plan. Go back to Debbie. I hope she's still with us. Yes, she's still on the screen.
Yep. Thank you, Chair. So again, apologies for not being there in person today. I didn't want to pass on all my germs to everybody just before Christmas. So this is the regular progress report, giving members an update on how we are doing in relation to delivery of the 22-23 internal audit plan that was approved by this committee back on the 26th of April 2022. So the first part of this report on page 231 of your pack just really sets the scene in terms of what our team have been working on for the first part of the year. And as you can appreciate, our work for the first half of the year is very much dominated by various grant verification exercises, both COVID-19 related grants and other. And I've just given a flavour within paragraph 1 of my report, some of the grant pieces of work that we get involved in. So in relation to Infection Control Fund, Contain Outbreak Fund, Test and Trace, as well as other grant work in relation to Disabled Facilities Grant, Green Homes, and also there's a variety of transport grants that we have to get involved in. The audit team has also still provided support on various key corporate transformation projects, such as the new recruitment applicant tracking system, which went live earlier this year. And also we have a dedicated ICT audit representative sitting on the EDRMS implementation project, and also a dedicated auditor that is assisting with the highways transformation programme. As you would expect, these are sort of key risks for the council. We are now embarking on undertaking some of our top risk audit reviews. So there's an audit review that's just been completed on cybersecurity, and we've penciled in our work to start in relation to children's and families, district models and decision making. Turning to page 232 of your pack, paragraph 2 of my report, this sets out any additional work that's been requested and is underway during the year. So we've had 13 additional pieces of work. Again, some of that relates to COVID grant pieces of work and other grant work as well. And also we were asked to undertake some work in relation to processes for the resettlement of Ukrainian refugees. I'm currently undertaking a piece of work on the council's traded company Nexus, again, just to give you a flavour of the different pieces of work that we're being asked to do. And as a result of that, we obviously need to balance off the resources that we have available to complete the whole plan. So I liaise with Lisa in relation to what resources we have available and what work is left to do, and we do various reconciliations. So as a result of those additional pieces of work, so far we have 6 cancellations, and those are detailed in Appendix 1 of this report. Where we can, we try and incorporate some of the elements of those cancelled pieces of work into work that we've still got left to do. So there is some audit coverage, and that is detailed within Appendix 1. We're still on course to hit our performance targets in terms of delivery of the plan, and also we continue to receive good customer satisfaction survey results as well. We are assisted during the year by an array of contractors that undertake work for us, and they are now embarking on delivering those pieces of work. The table that's on page 233 of your pack really then sets out where we are in terms of delivering of the plan, in terms of the numbers, in terms of how many audits and what stages they're at in terms of yet to be started, in field work or at draft. So that's set out within that table. As well as the county council work, we also undertake external client work, and that is academies, and also undertake the whole audit service for South Staffordshire Council. And figure one overleaf on page 234 of your pack sets out where we are in relation to the delivery of that work. And again, we are on target to deliver all that planned work. The second half of this report really just talks to you and gives you some assurance around recommendation tracking. So as you'll be aware, back in November 21, we implemented a new internal audit management system. And as part of that, we have a new Pentana recommendation tracking portal. And this is a bit of a shift really, because business users can actually go into that portal and update their recommendations in real time. It also allows for WLT and SLT members as well to get greater oversight in terms of those recommendations being implemented. So there's lots more visibility and oversight with this new system. And there are various notifications that the auditees will get. They get a report of all those recommendations that are due within the next 30 days, and then thereafter they will get a report on all those recommendations that are now overdue, hopefully prompting auditees to look at what they've got to do and actually to act upon those. And this really sort of works in tandem with the role of the Audit and Standards Committee, because by you asking various reports to come back to yourselves in relation to limited audit reports, that also allows for recommendations to be implemented far sooner. So I think between both of us, we do a good job in getting recommendations implemented. So as well as ongoing audit recommendations, when we implemented the new system, we obviously had to think about those outstanding recommendations, those older recommendations that we wanted to migrate onto Pentana. And we were really mindful of making sure that we weren't clogging up the new system with those recommendations that may no longer be relevant. So myself and the team set about from December 21 looking at those recommendations, and we had over 400 recommendations to look at. And I went about chasing the various teams to get an update. And a large proportion of those have now been implemented or superseded by different systems or our later audits. So as of the 1st of November 2022, we've got 94 older recommendations that have now been migrated onto the Pentana system that will be tracked until their implementation. So at paragraph 10 of my report on page 235 of your pack, you will see that in total we have 714 recommendations that are now on Pentana and are actively being tracked, and that includes those 94 older recommendations. I just wanted to bring to members' attention that in respect of schools recommendations, because we wanted to ensure that Pentana had been implemented correctly, we focused on getting systems audits into Pentana initially. So the schools audits were done outside of Pentana for 21-22. That has meant that those recommendations relating to the 21-22 audits have only recently been uploaded into the Pentana recommendation portal. I just wanted to give you some assurance that they are now all actively being tracked, because as you remember, there are a number of limited assurance reports from schools from 21-22, and the team are actively pursuing later responses to those recommendations. Moving on to page 236 of your pack, you will see that of those 344 recommendations that are outstanding, you will see those split between overdue and not overdue, and also within the various categories of low, medium and high. There are 19 overdue high level priority recommendations. Only 2 of those relate to corporate systems and the other 17 relate to schools. I've only included within Appendix 2 those two that are corporate, because again, going back to what I've just said, the other recommendations have only recently for schools have been loaded onto Pentana, and therefore we felt that to be fair to schools, we wanted to give them an opportunity to give later responses to those recommendations before bringing them back to committee. So very quickly, finally, just to refer to Appendix 1, which is on page 239 of your pack. This sets out those 6 audits that we are cancelling this year so far. And where we can, we look to include some of those elements within audits that are underway. And then on Appendix 2 on page 241 and page 242 of your pack, you will see those 2 high-level recommendations that are outstanding. The one in relation to building resilient families and communities, that has now been implemented. It just missed the deadline date for reporting. And the infrastructure plus asset data management, well, that limited assurance report was presented to you a little while ago, back in September. And again, you have got an update progress report coming back to this committee in April 23. And that relates to an assessment around updating the pavement management system and the pros and cons in relation to that. So, Chair, I'm happy to take any questions in relation to that report.
Thank you. I do actually indicate he's not just assuming there. I started off today by sort of mentioning or hinting at the size of the job in hand, and it makes my head spin sometimes just looking at these reports as opposed to operating the actual systems that are involved in tracking all of those follow-ups, which is the most important part, really. So with every respect to that, the information on the cancelled ones, I think, has been adequately, explained. They've been either time expired or subsumed. It's just the mechanism. Who actually cancels them? Is it the client? Is it yourselves? Is it as part of when they're scheduled? And the second part of the question, if I may, is overall, what is engagement like when you access different areas with regards to getting information to form part of the audit? And then with the recommendations that you've just mentioned, and there's a number that have carried over, are there any issues with regards to engagement with some of those? And should there be, what is the mechanism to try and get those resolved? Thank you.
Okay. So firstly, in terms of cancelled audits, so we may get an auditee that may request that an audit is cancelled. And as part of that process, I will discuss that with Lisa, and we will look to see what the risk is and whether we can look to include some of those elements in another audit. There are other audits as well whereby, again, I need to reconcile resources. So therefore, we tend to look at what audits we could potentially cancel with no impairment on the head of internal audit opinion. So there's a bit of both. It may be instigated by the auditee, or it may be instigated by us as the internal audit team. In terms of engagement, sorry, could you just remind me what that question was? I just put, what's engagement like? Sorry.
So when you actually start an audit process, engagement with different services within the organisation is one element to it. And then secondly, those recommendations that have been carried over, if there are issues with people's engagement in implementing recommendations, what is the process to resolve them?
Yeah, well, we are very fortunate at the County Council in that our audit management team has over 100 years plus experience in local government internal auditing, and the audit managers, Lisa and myself, have built up a very good rapport with many of the auditees, and therefore engagement is very good. We know that we can literally pick up the phone or do a Teams call and get responses very quickly if we want to. So overall, engagement is good. Should we get any issues in relation to the implementation of recommendations, again, after a few reminders, that is escalated to myself, and where necessary, it would be escalated through to Lisa, and if necessary, it would be escalated to Rob as well. I think what helps, I think I alluded to this in the report, by you receiving various reports in relation to top risk, limited assurance and investigation reports, and you requesting that, you know, a further progress report is brought back to this committee, this really does help in terms of the implementation of recommendations. And I do think the use of the Pentana system, we haven't got any figures at the moment because it's quite early doors, but what we'd like to do in future is to give some indication on the implementation rates. At the moment, we haven't got the data to support what we think, but I think with the various notifications that are going out automatically, because in the old world, we used to have to rely on the auditor pressing a button to send out an email reminder. Auditees can go in and in real time, as soon as they've implemented a recommendation, they don't have to wait for us any longer. They can just go and update it. And we are seeing lots of updates on recommendations. So fingers crossed, we'd like to think that the implementation rates will improve, but I haven't got, it's only a gut at the moment. I haven't got any data to firmly back that up. But in future, I'd like to think we can have some data.
Yeah, if I can just come back quickly there, Debbie. So is it up to the people who is incumbent upon them to implement the recommendations to then click a button to say that it's been done or to evidence that it's been done? I think there's a significant difference potentially there.
Yeah, we have, being auditors, we have set a control that an auditee can't just close a recommendation. So if they feel that they have implemented it satisfactory, they provide an update note, and where appropriate, they will attach various supporting documentation. That then gets the auditor who was assigned that audit will look at the update, where appropriate, look at the supporting paperwork and either agree it's signed off, or we'll have a further communication with them to say, well, actually, you've slightly missed the point, you need to do this. So we do have a control that the auditees cannot just sign off recommendations on their own.
One last one. A resident contacted me in the middle or in the early part of the year with a particular issue with regards to a child that they got in school who had been awarded some access arrangements funding. I was concerned about it, mentioned it to both Lisa and Debbie, and that was able to be then brought into another audit that was taking place at the time. I've had opportunity to feed back to the resident following subsequent findings and an audit having been taken place of improvements that are due to be implemented in that particular service. That resident was absolutely thrilled, which is the part that I'd like to feed back to yourselves over, that not only have they made sure that in that particular setting that that access arrangement funding is being used effectively, but also throughout the rest of the county. And that really made her day. So I think it just goes to show when it works well, and certainly gives me confidence being able to sit here and be able to say thank you both very much for your effort. It is much appreciated by me and also by the residents. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Debbie, thank you for this report. The bit that I always like to look at is the high priority, and that was on page 236, your little chart, and to see that all the high priority bar the school, as you mentioned, the schools have got a little more time, have been dealt with. I'm more than happy with that. The only bit that does concern me is number 4 on page 242, that we're not looking at the prevention of the homeless for 16 to 17-year-olds because an audit has already been done by somebody else. Especially with the amount of people coming into the country at the moment, we are going to see more homeless people. And so that one worries me, that we're pushing that one aside. Is there a way to bring this back in if there's time?
We can always look at that. I mean, something to say is that there is going to be an Ofsted inspection that was going to look at the end-to-end processes, which may involve a homelessness element. So we were going to wait to see what the Ofsted said. If we then need to do some further work, then of course we will take that on board and look at that. If not, we will reconsider this whole area into next year's audit plan. And again, we can do that in quarter 1. So it's not like it's a year or 2 years away. It's it could be months away before we start to look at this area again.
Debbie, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks again, Debbie, and also a big thanks. I'm sure we all appreciate all the work you had to undertake due to Lisa's absence, but a big thank you for myself as chairman and the vice chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, that's appreciated. Thank you.
That brings us to agenda item 9, the forward plan, which is back over to Lisa.
Thank you, Chairman. The paper that you have before you outlines the standard agenda items that are planned for the next 3 committees of this particular civic year. Draft dates for next year have been discussed and working through the proposed agendas for next year as well. Where relevant and where you've asked for additional pieces of work to come back, particularly in relation to SEND, they've been incorporated into this document. It's a live document, so it gets updated on a regular basis, and will also be updated for the additional external audit pieces when they're available and are ready, so they'll be incorporated into the agenda. Happy to take any questions that you may have regarding the content of future meetings.
Well, from my input, I think the SEND one to me is most important. I mean, I've just experienced one, a resident in my division, whereby there was a young lad who's got EHC, was 5 years out of date, not been updated. So I'm really pleased, because I think Dr. Hallett, who came last time, was obviously a very competent person. So something I'd like to address with him when he next comes back to us. So yeah, I welcome that forward plan. Anybody else got any comments on the forward plan?
Phil. Phil Hughes.
Phil?
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very short comments, really. There's 2 things. Firstly, it looks like a pretty busy year, Mr. Chairman, doesn't it? There's certainly a lot to go through, and I look forward to that. Secondly, just to confirm that this is a fluid document, and we can change it as and when. So if we pick something up at the beginning of the year, we want to look at it later on in the year, we can do that.
Absolutely. It updates each particular time, and if you requested an item, that's automatically included as well.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Nothing much, Chair, other than the fact that I'm not on the membership. So that will be good fun. I can retire happily and leave the room and never come back to... Yes, I must have done, yes.
Apologies, I will make sure you're included. Oh, right, okay. Thank you.
The closed part of the agenda. Yeah, I'm going to read it out now. Just waiting for him to switch off, but I'll read that the public be excluded from the meeting for the following items of business which involve the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in the paragraphs of Part 1 of the Schedule 12A as amended of the Local Government Act 1972 as indicated below. Oh, yeah.